Look at countdown.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Braymeyer, and welcome to the Less Than Yesterday show. I have the honor of introducing my special guest today. Before we get to that, I want to remind you that we are powered by your friends at Treadmill Heroes, residential and commercial fitness equipment, and saunas new and refurbished across the board. Good morning, Lynn.
Good morning, Joe.
Let me give everybody, I don't even know where to start, how to describe you, but I will say that you are one of Wilton's finest. You have a burning passion for this town, which we're going to get into. Proprietor of the Candy Kitchen, former funeral home director, Wilton Beaver through and through. So we're going to dive into that. I want to get right to it here.
Okay.
I had the pleasure of going out to dinner with you and your absolutely stunning wife, Brenda, with my wife, Lynn, who is equally stunning, I must say.
Absolutely.
And it was such a pleasure because
It was?
I got 2 hours of Lynn Ochiltree. Normally, it's 30 seconds at a shot.
In and out.
You are a very busy guy all day long. Your wife said something that really stuck with me.
Okay.
And she said it jokingly. But she said, Lynn loves me almost as much as he loves Wilton. And I know she was joking around by that. But you, of all people, love this town probably more than anybody. And so I have always wondered, where did that little ember start from? Take me back to that point in time where you're like, I love this town and I want to preserve everything there is about it, past and future. So,
Okay. So first of all, Brenda's birthday's on Saturday, so happy birthday to Brenda.
happy birthday, Brenda
We have to
Nemrick.
wish-
Hey,
yeah.
Steph, will you straighten out our camera there?
So Brenda's birthday, happy birthday. A big shout out to my wife. And she is correct. I do love her as much, but probably more. But she says that jokingly. So my passion really for this community probably started when I was 8 years old, actually. I still have documents written in my own handwriting of documenting history of our family that goes back to 1849 in Wilton, connected to Christian Maroff, and also to the Feltman family in 1854. So my grandpa Ochiltree always encouraged me to spend time with my great-grandma Minnie. Her name was Wilhelmina. She was Wilhelmina Jasperson, and her ancestor was the settler of our farm that we live on for 7 generations. Currently, his name was Anton Feldman, and Gerald Ochiltree said, spend time with great-grandma, give her your time, listen to her stories, and I did. I used to read her the newspaper, and she'd tell me stories of Wilton. Growing up, walking down the road to the country schools, and we had a great time. I had a great time just listening to her. And so I think that instilled that passion in me to know more about where we came from. And it wasn't until I was in college that I helped research for the history of Simpson College. Professor Joe Walt was a mentor of mine, and until that point, I hadn't really done as much research about Wilton. And so at that point, when I was in college, I started to do more research about the Wilton College, and that kind of ended up where we are today.
So you're hanging with grandparents. They're telling you about the history of the town. At that point in time, it's more so just spending time with family.
Spending time.
Did you fall in love with researching first, and then you're like, I can apply this to the town that I grew up in?
Well, I think what I fell in love with as a history major in college, based on my love of history because of my great-grandma Minnie instilling in me a love of history and the stories. And I think that the biggest thing for me is just things are forgotten, and I just have a passion to not allow those things to be forgotten. So there's so many things in history that that end up being forgotten because people live it and then they die, and the next generation sometimes doesn't pass that on to the knowledge to the next generation. So to me, that is so exciting to find something new in my research about someone or something that happened, and just have just have an eagerness to always find that. It's like archaeology.
Well, that's a good way of putting it, because the last thing I'm ever going to do is consider your Wilton archive a collection. The word collection would not do it justice. I have a collection of things. You have an archive of artifacts that date back to the beginning of the town. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first thing that you got that you're like, wow, I have something that matters to the history of this town, and I need to make sure to take care of it?
I think that the first thing that it's an intangible but turned into a tangible was a story of my great-great-grandma dying in 1898, and I audio taped the story that Minnie Ochiltree told me, Grandma Minnie, about that. And so that is probably the most precious thing to me, is that audio tape of my great-grandma telling that story. We've got little 12-year-old me in there talking like this, and it's kind of fun to listen to. But
really?
That's a really special piece. But I would say that the thing that really got me pushed forward with the collection that is probably in excess of 250,000 artifacts today would be the picture of the Wilton College, and that was given to me by Francis Frymore. And if anyone remembers Curtis and Francis Frymore, they were huge historians in the area. And that picture from 1880 that was mailed just to Wilton, Iowa, to the post office was given to me, and that really probably is the very first piece that really got me hooked on finding more.
Was that given to you right when it got mailed to town?
No, it had been mailed to town probably in the 70s.
Okay.
And Frances was moving out of her house about the time that I was graduating from college and doing the research of Simpson College for my professor. And I came back one weekend to visit, and I went to her to visit about the college, and we were friends, and she gave me a few things at that time about the college, and that's when she had given it to me.
When you say 250,000 Wilton artifacts, I don't think people can possibly understand the scope of that. I've had the pleasure of getting some sneak peeks into the archive of the items that you have. Mm-hmm. And I've only seen just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm blown away, not only at the items themselves, but just the way that you have them displayed, preserved, and the stories that each of those tell. It's incredible. Now, it's incredible for me because I'm a collector at heart. I like items. I like the history behind those items. But this goes to a completely another level, because it's not like, well, I'm into comic books or I'm into action figures or whatever it is. These are real things that were part of the day-to-day life in Wilton way back in the past, all the way up until now.
Correct.
It's incredible. And you can't possibly store all those in one place. So I know you've got plans for those, but where is all this stuff at right now?
Well, it started out in my bedroom when I lived in Winterset, and some things stayed in my parents' basement. That expanded to be part of the garage in Winterset, and then a part of the storage at our candle shop, the Laurel and Candles. There's some in our basement, there's some in our garage, there's some in the Star Drug building, there's some in the candy kitchen. That's everywhere.
Well, then, you know what? Let's just dive right into it. What are you going to do with it all? Like, how do you...
Well, it doesn't belong to me.
Right.
I have a very strict rule that if you give me something for the archives, that it will remain in the archives. And so it doesn't belong to me. Upon my death, it'll just all be left in our nonprofit, the Wilton Archives LTD. We established that a couple of years ago to help to preserve and to raise money to use to preserve the artifacts. But we're looking to build a museum for the county next to the candy kitchen, called the Heritage Center.
And that'd be the empty lot just to the north of the candy kitchen. You own that lot.
We own that lot. So that's the dream. The county doesn't have an archives. We have some, of course, Musser Library has some things. The public library here has some things. There's stuff in each community within the county. I think West Liberty does a great job with the Historical Society as group there. Wilton does have a historical group here, but we don't really have a place to put things. For instance, some of the stuff I brought today, we just have thousands of pieces of paper that, need a home that's climate controlled and a place to be able to highlight and store it.
it's a passion, but I have to imagine that there is some stress involved in preserving all of these items because a lot of these are one of ones.
Correct.
Just talk to me about that. How do you navigate through the pressures of this? And I'm sure it's a lot of self-inflicted pressure, but at the same time, you effectively have the history of this entire community in one place, soon to be in one big place.
Well, it is kind of a burden because, people will say, oh, I have this and I have that. And I never say no because one time I did say no and I already had something and someone found something else and said, oh, I got rid of that because you said you didn't need it. So I never say no, even if it's just a program from yesterday's football game, because even though I might have 4 of them already, I never say no because I don't want anyone to ever say, oh, well, he didn't really need that. I'd rather make that decision than have you make that decision because the best things, as Joe knows, is always in the dumpster. And that's the best place to be is the dumpster because that's where all the really cool stuff that gets cleaned out of the basement and the attic are first. So, yeah, you're smiling because you know that's true.
Oh, I've dumpster dove before.
So I have dumped a dove dive. Anyway, I've made a dive several times.
Dumpster divin.
Yeah, I even taught my son Christian to love the dumpster. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But it is kind of a burden because people do come when they bring things and they say we have these things and our family doesn't want them, and then you have to find a place to store them. And Brenda always says it'd be great if everything someone donated came with a $100 bill because we still have to find room for it and find a box to put it in, and we spend lots of money on archive boxes and. It is a burden, but it's a good burden, and I feel like it's kind of like adopting children. You just get one more child to take care of.
There's pressure not only on the 4th edition of the football program that you already have, right?
Correct.
But then you get some real gems that show up along the way.
You want to see one?
I would love to start seeing some of these. So you brought in some quick items, and I sprung this sit down with you. On you, and so you just showed up with some things. So I want to get into what all this is.
Well, here's a really great piece. It's the Union Savings Bank, and this is from 1928. Is that correct? Yep. And this was found in the attic of a local home here in south of Wilton. Margaret Maroff Actually, when Margaret Maroff was cleaning out her house, she had newspapers from Wilton that went back to the 1940s, 30s. So we collected all of the newspapers. So we have a complete set of Wilton newspapers all the way back to 1932, and then along with it came some calendars, about 100 of them.
This is incredible. So this is from 1928. You're seeing some familiar last names on here: Maurer, Bud Lear. What I find fascinating about this is the bank is touting the fact that they've got $50,000 in capital.
That's it.
And $35,000 in surplus. Can you imagine?
Amazing.
And so it starts off at the month of February here. What is this weather forecast for February? So they were able to give...
Probably from the almanac. They probably used...
Just the farmer's almanac type of thing.
Yeah, it was probably a calendar that was produced by a company for them, and they had that as filler probably for the calendar.
And this was just sitting in an attic?
And it was actually rolled up in the eave of the attic. It was one of the last things I found that day I was working in there. So it's really a great piece. And that building, 1889, that building was built on the corner of 4th Street and Cedar Street. Was built by Charles Curtis, was the contractor. And we also have a really cool piece when they remodeled the building a few months ago. We have a piece of molding that has his name written on the back and says Wilton, Iowa. It's really cool.
4% paid on savings deposits. What do we get nowadays? I can't.
Point one.
Point one. Yeah, if that. So can we go back to that? Can we get 4% on savings deposits?
Yeah,
Holy smokes! The bank wanted your money. What else you got?
There's another great piece if I can find it.
And this calendar is one of over 250,000 items. This is wild.
So this is a great piece. This is a great piece.
Here.
This was commissioned by Brenda and I the year we got married in 2001. That's a street scene from Wilton. It's based on a real photograph that we have, the original of, from 1873. And Carol Steinmetz, who is connected locally here to Passvogels. Linda Passvogel is her daughter. And she used to be a Wathen. And Carol Steinmetz, very famous in Muscatine, watercolors. And she produced that for us. And we had her do 2 in the series. One is the original photo of the Wilton College that I mentioned earlier. But that's
Are any of these buildings still downtown?
No, everything on that street was burnt down in 1874 during the fire, the big fire.
I didn't know there was a big fire in downtown Wilton.
So every single thing there, fire started here down close to the elevator and then went north on that side of the street, took out everything. And so everything on the west side of Cedar Street is 1874 or later. Like the Candy Kitchen is 1856. So it's the oldest building in Wilton. The only building remaining from the construction in Wilton, the first few months, is the Candy Kitchen. Everything else is gone, other than maybe a portion of a couple houses.
I guess I didn't realize that I just assumed the Candy Kitchen building was around the same age as all the other buildings in downtown.
1856. It was probably one of the very first buildings built in that wave of construction. Cedar Street was built first, north, and Railroad Street was built as well. 4th Street was built later, so everything on Cedar Street was older.
This is a neat painting. I think it's fascinating. You have the original photo.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, original photo is a panoramic photo.
Wow.
I actually have an original negative of it as well that was made sometime. I don't know at what point it was made, but it came from California from Zella Abbott's son.
Speaking of that, these artifacts that are going into the archive, they didn't all just originate here and stay here, and now they're in the archive. They've originated here, left Wilton,
correct,
and somehow found their way back.
I found a C.A. Kaiser owned a grocery store here in Wilton. We just found his original cash register for his store a few months ago in Muscatine at a sale.
It was randomly at a sale. I mean, Muscatine's not that far away, but for it to still be in existence is wild.
Yeah, I knew the son, or I knew the gentleman who owned it, and I knew he was connected to Wilton, but didn't know that he had the original cash register still. But we just obtained that recently. But what I was going to say is that C.A. Kaiser grocery store did a series of little plates, little date plates, and I found one of those over in Oxford, England. I found it on eBay once. So it's amazing. And Brenda found a couple pictures from Wilton, stereographs. If you're familiar with what a stereograph is, it's a two-image photo that you look through a stereopticon, and then you get cross-eyed and get one picture from the two. There were some early Wilton pictures from 1874, 1880 that she found, 3 of them that she found for the collection in Syracuse, New York.
Do you get teasers along the way and then those drive you nuts? In other words, do you have somebody come into the Candy Kitchen and say, you know, I think my grandpa has such and such item. I'll have to look into that and get back to you. And then does that stick in your mind and you go, oh my gosh, if that really does exist out there, right, I have to figure out a way to get that into the archives?
Yeah, there's a few pieces that come to mind. There's an implement made by A.T. Nelson that someone brought to show me one day, and he says, well, I'm going to show it to you, but I'm not going to sell it to you or give it to you. Of course, you have to remember, I don't get all this stuff given to me. I buy a lot of stuff too. And Brenda says, you need to stop spending your own money because, you know, that's just, we need money too.
Right.
But so there are pieces that come. There are people that say things that they have, and I always am very nice about it. And I always say that if I could make a copy, if I could see it, if I could take a picture. So most people are pretty gracious. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't want this crap. You know, that's what it is to some people. But
right,
they don't realize what they have sometimes because they just don't understand what the value of it is intrinsically and historically.
Has there ever been anything where it's the opposite way around, where, in other words, it's available, but the price point is just like, I can't jump on it? Or
yeah, there's been a couple things that I've passed on. There's your dad and I, we share a Mauer Oldsmobile sign. And Eddie, Freddie, Willie had signs made up. I think you remember the one in the store it has a number on it that says how many miles to get to the store.
Yes.
So we both have one of those. And there was a third one that I know existed. I'm sure there were others, but there was a third one. A guy just, he just wanted thousands of dollars for it. And it's not worth thousands of dollars, and it's not worth it. Because like Brenda says, Lynn, you're going to get somebody going to give you one someday. So why spend the money on it? And that happens more and more. As I get older, I realize that it isn't the end of the world if I don't have something, and you'll get there someday, Joe. And you're collecting, you know.
Oh man, I'm trying to find balance.
Don't worry.
I want to talk about that particular sign that you're discussing right now. Because it's interesting. Because there's a collector market for it outside of Wilton because it has an old Goodyear logo on it.
It's got there's lots of reasons to collect it.
And how it was set up was it was a sign that was miles outside of town that said, hey, there's a garage in Wilton for, to get your car fixed. Yeah. And each mile that you got closer, it was the same sign, but it had a different how many miles are left to get there.
Correct.
And which mile marker do you have?
I think mine's 2.
And I think is Dad's 1?
Dad's is either 2 or it's 1, 2, or 3. I can't remember. I can't remember what I keep thinking his is 2 and mine's 2, but I think that's not right.
I wonder how many were in existence, like how many miles it went.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like the signs you see for Wall Drug, coming up. It's kind of the same type of thing. It would have been on Highway 6, of course, because that was the main highway.
What else you got?
Okay. This is kind of cool. This is a drawer. First of all, look at the really cool drawer handle here. This is the original 1870s, 1880 drawer handle. This is a drawer that came out of the Star Drug when we renovated the Star Drug building. We replaced all the cabinetry doors, and all the original drawers were there, but the original pulls were there too, and that is an original pull with the paint cleaned off. And this drawer, if you tip it up, you'll see inside of it, it is a sign. It was made from a sign that would have been advertising, I think it was paint for the Star Drugstore. So I think this is a really cool piece. And that's just in the building. It was recycled and in the 1880 cabinetry that's there. There's a couple drawers that are not quite as ornate as this. Ornate or interesting, but they're made from boxes. They just made them from old shipping containers. In fact, I can tell from the back of this is just made from an old shipping container box, railroad box.
So this originally was a sign, do you think, within the Star Drug store?
Yeah, they probably had it as an advertisement in the window or outside or something.
And then one day they're building cabinets and drawers, and we need some lumber, and we'll just use that sign.
Yeah. So,
holy smokes.
That's one of the most fascinating things for me that I've collected. I don't just collect it from Wilton. I do collect a lot of railroad shipping containers. Anything that was a box that something came in 50 or 100 years ago is really cool because they were mostly wooden or an interesting thick cardboard. But I have a lot of old Wilton boxes that came from railroad shipping. I have a couple to a grocery store from Wilton where they would have just shipped stuff to Wilton.
The other thing that I want to point out here is whether that drawer is worth $1 or $5,000. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter to you. Mm-mm. What matters is it's home, it's in the archive, it's with all the other items.
Yep.
So there again, that's why you can't call this a collection. A collection somewhere along the lines has a monetary value associated with it. Mm-hmm. It would be impossible to associate a monetary value to this. It truly is priceless artifacts. There again, that's a one of one.
One of a kind, yeah. There's a lot of one of a kinds. There's just an intrinsic value, just an emotional value. And to me, we're saving something that someone made 120 years ago. And to me, that's really important. I don't know who made it, but I know that somebody did, and they were from Wilton. And that means that's everything.
Hence the pressure and the burden and the excitement.
Exciting.
All mixed into one.
It's more exciting than burdensome.
Well, sure.
But yeah, you're correct. Boy, you know me pretty well.
Well, I know myself, and I know just the pressures I'd put on myself for this stuff. What else, Brian? What's this thing here? Oh, this is. Oh, I want to save this. I know what this is.
Yeah.
I want to save this.
So this is some stuff we did. You know, the colorization is something that's happening today. Oh, let's set him down.
Yeah.
This is a picture of Aaron Park. And Aaron Park, this story I told Joe the other night at dinner because he said, "Tell me something I don't know." And of course, I had to have Brenda prompt me because I couldn't get it out of my head quickly. But she said, "Tell about Aaron Park." So here's Aaron Park, and he was funeral director here in Wilton. Came in 1860. And if you flip it around, we took a picture of him and we colorized it. Actually, sent it to a professional studio and had a painting made of it. But he was the second funeral director here in Wilton. But Aaron Park and I share a common thing because we're both funeral directors. He was the first president of the Iowa Funeral Directors Association, and I was the 125th president of the Iowa Funeral Directors Association. And so we share in common that connection to the profession and the association. But anyway, he's been reproduced from an original photograph. But yeah, there's some cool things we've done with some stuff too. That isn't just old stuff we found. We've taken old stuff and made it really cool. I know Ted Maroff's done some stuff, and there's a guy from Muscatine that's done a lot of stuff with old pictures, and you can colorize them. But this just takes it to another level. It's fun to see things in color that weren't, but that also changes the whole perspective of history too.
Well, certainly. And this is also a good reminder. Like, for whatever reason, I think of the movie Tombstone here, right? And there's that iconic scene of the the mortician, the undertaker, and they're standing there, and they're in every small town. Of course, there had to be a mortician,
right?
An undertaker, a butcher, baker, candlestick maker. But this was the guy.
This was the guy.
He was the second guy ever to be running a funeral home in Wilton.
The first was Briggs, and Briggs died, and that he was here in 1855, 56, and then Briggs died shortly there, about 1858, 59. And I think maybe I might be incorrect. He may have came in 1858, but I know for sure he was here in 1860. But of course, he was the guy that when someone died, they'd say, well, we need a casket 4 feet long, and he'd be like, he could make it. So that's why funeral directors were cabinet makers.
But I do feel like it's fascinating in many aspects, but the fact that he was the very first president of the Iowa Funeral Home Directors Association, did I say that right? Mm-hmm. And then you were the 125th.
Right.
And you're, I don't want to say collecting, you're acquiring all these artifacts, and you have something from him. Yeah. That certainly means a lot.
And he buried my great-great-grandma that my grandma Minnie tells me about in the interview. So he was the funeral director that took care of her funeral.
So there's a reference to him in the interview.
Well,
maybe not a reference, but
she doesn't say his name, but I know that's who it was.
There's a connection.
There's a connection. And then another connection, which is really interesting, is my son was born November 26, 2008, and my great-great-grandma died November 26, 1898. So kind of it all kind of comes together. That story is the most important, probably. It's the linchpin. That's a good word.
Yes, it is.
Or the cornerstone of my stories. There you go. What else we got?
Let's do something fun here. Well, not that that's not fun, but what do we got here?
Okay, so this is a vintage.
Oh wow!
Wilton Beavers Eager Beaver shirt. I don't know for sure. I need to do more research. I have 3 or 4 in the same logo with the exhausted beaver. That's what we call it. He's running, and in fact, we're not sure what year that is, but we think it's about 80, maybe 82, 83.
Do you know when abouts the first Eager Beaver run was?
1980.
Okay, so this is one of the very first shirts.
Yeah, if anybody out there has the first shirt and they know it, I'd like to see it so we can compare. We need some picture verifications and stuff. It'll be easy to do. It's just one of those projects we haven't gotten to do. But I do want to tell you real quickly, I just had a really great visit with Mike Wyatt the other day. He was here, stayed in one of our Airbnbs above the Star Drug, and he was telling the story that he actually came up with the name of the Eager Beaver Run. So that was kind of a fun little bit of history.
Really?
Because his mom, Anita, was the chamber director, and they were doing this run, and he suggested, why don't we call it the Eager Beaver? The Eager Beaver Race or something like that.
See, that's another little thing that I feel is interesting and important, somebody had to come up with the name of the Eager Beaver Run.
And that's it, Mike Wyatt. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Mike's a great guy. So here's what happens. I have coffee at the Candy Kitchen every day. We get about 15 to 20 guys come in, and they tell stories. They mostly tell things over and over and over, and inappropriate things. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. But like yesterday, someone said the name Stackhouse, and I was working on my Wilton calendar for the archives this year, and someone said the name Stackhouse. There's a picture of a Stackhouse in the calendar, and then someone said, "Well, they own the restaurant across the street." And so I went to my office and I typed in my notes, Stackhouse owned the Wilton Cafe. More research to be done, according to Merrill Nouse. That's who told me. So, so I write that stuff down every day. And I hear stuff. Now, of course, you're busy a lot of days. You don't have time to do it every day and things get behind. But I try to keep up with the notes because it's stuff to research later.
That's another thing that people don't realize. Down at the Candy Kitchen, you're always documenting things. You've got papers and all of these things. It's wild to me.
It's a mess, but it's organized in a way because it is all that.
It's more. This is something that a team needs to take on, right?
Did we win that $500 million lottery last night? I wonder.
I don't think so.
That'd be fun.
I didn't get any notifications. I think I have a ticket I need to scan, so who knows. If I did win, maybe I can get somebody on the payroll for you and help out.
I just want one person.
Back to this T-shirt real quick. Is this the first shirt, or is it possible there's an earlier rendition of the Eager Beaver?
There's a white one that has red trim, and there's this one, and there's another one. I can't remember exactly, but it's the same logo, same exhausted beaver running. I don't know which was the first.
Do you have
but it's very early.
Do you have any pictures of anyone wearing this shirt during the Eager Beaver run?
Probably, but again, like I said, it's just time.
Maybe it's there.
Maybe it's there.
But it'd be nice if one walked in the door.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if one walked in the door, guys. Go through the shoe boxes. Find a picture. Don't bring the whole shoebox. Lynn's got plenty of shoebox. Bring the picture of somebody wearing this shirt. That would be fun to see.
Yeah.
So, speaking of you documenting things and preserving all the history, we have your calendar that you do.
Yep.
And this calendar, I want to do it justice, so I'm going to have you explain this passion project that you have.
Okay.
So tell me about the calendar.
This is hot off the press. It's still not done. There's a printing error on the front of it, so this will be one of a kind because it didn't print right. But anyway, so this one is dedicated. This year's is dedicated to Bobby Fischer, who's a Wilton native, who is a Nashville recording star for the last 60 years. Not recording. He did record some things, but he's mostly a songwriter. So this calendar was dedicated to him this year. So we try to do a calendar every year. Thelmanopoulos did a calendar in 1995 and 96, and I helped her with that calendar along with Ruth Jipp helped her, and Frances Frymore, and Thelma and I spent a lot of time researching it. It became the foundation for her book, which she did write and published in 2005. So the calendar is kind of an homage to that because Brenda said, Lynn, you have so many amazing things in your collection. You need to highlight and show them and start the tradition of the calendar again. And so with her help and a gal that worked with us at the funeral home, we started to do that. So up to this point, we've done one. We've done one since 2018 to date. We did miss 1 year. And Jimmy Kress collected them, all of them, and he said, you need to make that one from 2001. And I'm like, okay, so someday I'm going to make a 2001 calendar.
Going to go back in time.
Yeah, go back in time. But it was just too much in the world going on. But so the calendar really is becoming probably a book, just like Thelma's did. So at this point, we have over 95 great little stories already written about Wilton and some of its history, some of it current, some of it past. You'll see in this calendar, we've highlighted some information about the historic Wilton Beavers football team. I know it's not germane to 2025, but it will be an interesting thing for people to see as a keepsake.
This is a history book of Wilton that just happens to have a calendar in it is really what it is.
And so the whole calendar thing is really not my thing, but doing what Thelma did is kind of what we did as an homage to that. But like Brenda has really encouraged, it helps us to organize the stories.
And there's pictures in here of other artifacts, I'm assuming, that are in the archive that you have.
Yes. Like there's a story about a rug weaver here in Wilton. His name was Howard Gill, and we just recently received a rug that he made in the 1950s. He and his wife made rugs for the Hoover birthplace.
Oh, this is cool. You have the 2024 football season in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's always hard because, how do you pick and choose what you select? But sometimes it comes down to the fact that I lost everything. I was just telling someone this morning that I lost the entire thing about 2 weeks ago. So I had to start all over.
You were telling me this at dinner the other night.
So it kind of just gets, I have a plan most years, but now we're to the end. I have one more month to do, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But I'll finish it today. And they'll be available at the Candy Kitchen and various other locations around Wilton. The proceeds all go to benefit the Wilton Archives.
To your knowledge, is the school teaching anything about Wilton history?
So we do have a Wilton History Day, which is every 3 years. They do that. They do that because they try to do it so they don't overlap kids. They'll get through a certain age, and then they'll do it again 3 years later. And so they do that still. And I believe next year will be another Wilton History Day tour of downtown.
So there's a Wilton History Day that comes around once every 3 years.
Correct.
And who takes part in that student-wise?
All of the students in, I think, 3rd grade through 6th grade, I believe it is. I think that's how it is. Nobody in high school does. It's just junior high and elementary, and so it's collaborated by, I think, Becky Norton Bradfield was the one that got that started, and so I think I've participated in 3 or 4, maybe 5 of those events. But the school is the one that precipitates it, and they get people to get involved, like myself, and I know Becky Allgood helps, and Mark Nouse helps, and Ted Maroff's helped, and so a lot of us will volunteer to help tell stories of downtown when the kids come downtown.
So I kind of got wound up about this particular topic the other night when we were talking. I did, and not in a bad way, but just in a passionate, excited way.
Yeah.
Let's play a little game of what if.
Okay.
What if the Wilton High School came to Lynn Ochiltree and said, we want to have a 1 semester long Wilton history course for seniors, and it would be there'd be a credit for it, whatever. I don't know how that's all structured. Mm-hmm. And Professor Ochiltree comes in and spends a semester truly educating the seniors on the history of this town, from the earliest known forming of the town to the people who built it, all the way up until today. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that would be something that you'd be on board with, or you'd be excited about the idea of it?
I think I'm excited about the idea of it. I think that you always, I've always said this, you have to know the past to know where you're going. And people, I always say this too, when young kids come through Wilton History Day, I always tell the stories and usually stand downtown and say this was this and this was that. And I refer to my longtime connection to Christian Maroff, who's the first settler. He'd be my 5th great uncle. And I say, whether you're connected 7 or 8 generations to Wilton, or whether you moved here 15 minutes ago, you're now part of this community. And I think that knowing where you come from is really important. And so, yes, it is important. And I do think it would be a worthwhile adventure and a project. It can also be parlayed into lots of different things, because you can talk about Wilton in comparison to what was going on in other parts of the country historically. And Wilton is no different than many western expansion communities that found the railroad here and found people coming from the east. And it's a great story.
There's so much noise out there in the world today, especially about history. Well, this happened. Actually, it didn't. History is being so distorted.
Misinformation, disinformation.
There's a ton of that out there. And you have real items to say this really happened, and here is the hard proof of that. I don't even think you could even scratch the surface in a whole semester, but you have to have a beginning and an end here.
There's some highlights.
As much as the once every 3 years Wilton History Day is fun for the kids, let's face it, that's just a fun day out of the school. It's a little field trip to walk around downtown, right? And I'm sure there's a couple kids that are like, oh, that's kind of neat. Well, what are we doing after school? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
To me, I was never into school, the classes, and I just wasn't into it. But if I had a semester-long course of Wilton history, of, hey, you've heard the name Mauer in town? Do you really want, let's dive into where that came from and how far it goes back and how important some of these last names are to where we were, to where we're going. I have to believe that there's enough people in town that would get behind that to figure out a way to work that into the curriculum.
It'd be easy. But I think something that goes along that lines, I think about the first store in Wilton. Tuttle and Hill had a first general store. The first birth in Wilton, which was John Lucy. The first death in Wilton, which was Mrs. Rexroth. We don't know her first name. The first person to buy property here was Benjamin Kaufman and Henry Strom. The first are important, and
these things, and you have historical documents to back it up.
Yeah. Well, and we have to give credit to Henry Wildison for a lot of it. His book I reference almost every day. It's not a perfect book. It's not a perfect history, but it has an amazing documentation of those things, and that's why it's important to continue that, because the generation from 1947 to date, we don't really have that. Now, Thelma did a book, and there's a lot of good information in there, but those things need to be remembered, and whether you think they're important or not, but the first are important because they show the strive, the dedication, the commitment, the people that started things, that founded things that we still use today in this community, from local government to the railroad that still goes through here. So it impacts us every day, whether we realize it or not. And I don't want those people to be forgotten. Like R.A. McIntyre started a confectionery in the Candy Kitchen in 1860. So that was the history of that business, started in 1860 and goes on through to the Candy Kitchen. But we can't forget about him because he also was a father of our government in our community too. And so those people are important.
And it ties into the historical museum you want to build.
Correct.
And now you could have, I'm getting all wound up about this.
You're all excited.
I'm excited about this because to me, if there was a semester-long course on the history of Wilton, and right down the street, there is a small town museum like no other small town in this country. I would bet your archive rivals any small town's archive full of artifacts from the history of that town. It would rival any town. And to have all of these things effectively right now just kind of, I don't want to say sitting in a tomb, but there's just so much they need to be shown the light of day. But what else it does, there will be a small handful of kids, I don't want to say kids, young adults that go through that course that it will ignite a Lynn Ochiltree fire in them. And then what it does is if you have 2, 3, 4, even one senior out of every class that goes, you know what? This town is pretty damn special, and I want to take it to the next level. In a short amount of years, all of a sudden, you see Wilton a resurgence. You see it the way it used to be, and you see it being rebuilt back up, and the downtown being super vibrant, and the Founders Day celebrations and all of that. All of a sudden, the past ones will pale in comparison to the new ones. I know it's there because you have all of the fuel to get that fire going. And I sincerely hope that there's some discussions about it someday.
Yeah, I think there could be. I want to say in reference to that, I always tell Christian when he was little, and I still tell him, he's 16 now, I say you have to be interesting to have people be interested. And I believe that in anything that I do, you have to be interesting and honest and a lot of other things. But interesting will create interest. And Wilton is interesting if you know about it, and it will create interest. And you're right, that goes to the heart of what you just said.
Tell me a funny story about Thelma. Do you have you spent so much time with Thelma?
Did spend a lot of time with Thelma. I loved her. We wouldn't have the candy kitchen if it wasn't for her. She was something. She was amazing, a force to be reckoned with. But there wasn't a lot of humor with Thelma.
Thelma was a polarizing figure in town.
She was a polarizing figure.
There were people that loved Thelma. There were people that just didn't like Thelma, and for whatever reason. But she was an important figure in this town.
I will challenge anyone to the fact that she probably did more for this town in the last 50 years than most people. And it was mostly behind the scenes. Now, don't get me wrong. There's great people like Anita Wyatt who worked with the Chamber of Development and all of those things, and Bill Ravadu that had the newspaper, and Jake Davies that had the grocery store. But Thelma was always a cheerleader for Wilton, and she was always supporting those people.
And it was a like me or not, I don't care. I love this town, and I'm going to do what I feel is best for the town.
Tenacious is the word to describe her. But as far as something funny,
I don't know if there was a lot of humor around Thelma, but because she was a businesswoman. But
I know a great story. So it's cold today. I'm not sure if anybody noticed, but Thelma and I was helping her with the history that was incorporated in the calendar, and this was probably in January of 1994, and we had to go to Images and Ink to see the proof. And it was snowing, and we drove from Wilton to Durant in a snowstorm, just Thelma and I. And I'll never forget that day. She talked about it over and over years later about how we had to go to Durant to get that calendar.
It had to have been that day.
And we got there, and Images and Ink was closed because there was a snowstorm. And I'm like, so we did all this, and Thelma kind of laughed about that years later, that we made this adventure in her Acura to Durant. We almost died for history. Yeah.
And you have Thelma's original red, do we call it a dress?
I have a red blouse and slacks that she wore in the museum.
And it's what she wore every day.
She wore that most every day, yeah. We also have some uniforms that she wore back in the 70s as well that are a little bit different than that. But yeah, we have some cool things that she wore, the family gave us.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot.
I'm nervous.
And you know what? And we'll make it easy on you. Of the people that have already passed away, okay? So that way we don't worry about hurting any feelings.
Okay.
Of the people who have already passed away, who is on Lynn Ochiltree's Mount Rushmore of Wilton? And I don't want you to consider it, because you could build a Mount Rushmore of 1,000 people. But off the top of your head, who's on your Mount Rushmore?
Henry Wilderson.
Who was who?
He was the historian of Wilton. He wrote the history of Wilton in 1947 when he was 92 years old. And if it wasn't for him saving the history and documenting it, we wouldn't have what we have today.
Okay.
He is Mount Rushmore number one. Born in 1855, the same year that Wilton was founded. Died in 1962, just shy of his 107th birthday.
I've never heard that name before. That's fascinating.
He's right here. You can pick him up.
Oh.
He's right here.
Oh. Henry Wilderson?
Henry Wilderson. Mm-hmm.
This is your George Washington head
Yeah.
of the Wilton Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
And so say that again. He was the first person to preserve the history of Wilton.
He had knowledge. He was born in 1855, and I mean, he lived here his entire life, and he really is Wilton and the history. He preserved history. I mean, he walked on the streets. He walked on that 1874 street when he was, 19 years old. He documented amazing things about who lived here when what they did and where they came from, and he is amazing. Yeah, amazing. His history of Wilton is like I said, a reference that I look at almost every day. I mean, I could never even imagine to even be that important.
Okay. Who's number 2? Or at least on Mount Rushmore?
Mount Rushmore. I would probably say Curtis and Francis Frymore would be number 2 in my estimation. They did a lot. They helped write the second history of Wilton in 1976, along with the Bicentennial Commission for Wilton Committee. Wilton Moscow Yesteryear is that history, and I would say that they would be number 2.
Okay.
Together.
Who else?
I think, boy, I want to say a name, but I'm not sure I should say it.
Why don't you think you should say it?
Because I think that they're really important, but in a different way. I think there's so many people. Well, I'm just going to say this name. So Jake Davies comes to mind that owned Jake's grocery store. He wasn't from here, but he came here and he made this his adopted hometown. And his son Dave has an amazing knowledge of quirky, anecdotal, after dark history of Wilton, which I love, and I want to document that too. We do document a lot of after dark, but it's not always appropriate. But
yes,
but Jake loved this town and did a lot for it. But then the reason I hesitate to say it because there's so many others like Otto Wendling, that was a mayor of Wilton, and Bill Ravideau, who had the newspaper. There was during that time of the 50s, those people in the 50s, Herschel Flater, the Nicholases that ran the bank. I mean, those people, that era of people in the 50s did a lot to support this community.
Let's go back to Jake Davies, because Jake was one of those iconic figures in town, because every small town has to have a grocery store, especially back then.
Yeah.
You didn't just hop in the car and drive 15 miles down the road to some big box grocery store. Back then, you had the grocery store. And Jake, he started the store.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he worked for the Economy grocery store, which was owned by Roundy was his name, Burl Roundy from Columbus Junction. And Jake came up in the 30s to work there, 1939, I think. And then he ended up buying Grader's Meat Market in 1942, which was the basis of his grocery store. And
just from my own recollection of Jake from when I was a kid, because I do remember him, you would go into the grocery store, Jake would always have on his white butcher's apron, and he'd give you a hug, and he'd reach into the pouch, and he'd give you a Tootsie Roll.
Yep, Tootsie Rolls.
And that just, it was so charming. You didn't realize it at the time, but you look back at that, and you're like, that was just a very small little thing that Jake did that mattered to a lot of people. A hug and a Tootsie Roll. How can we get back to that? Can we get back to a hugs and Tootsie Rolls in this town? I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, it'd be pretty easy. But yeah, that's what Brenda and I, that's our passion every day at the Candy Kitchen. It's a lot of work, and yes, it's exhausting, and we need more help, and everybody has that same problem. But it's so rewarding to just make that connection to people. And, we don't really do anything special. We just treat people special.
I got to say, and I'm not just telling you this because you're sitting in here, you're doing wonderful things for this town. We are as they say, you're one generation away from completely losing history. And you have somehow miraculously preserved all of this history. But it has to get, somebody at some point is going to have to take the torch and run with it. And certainly you've got Christian, a wonderful young man, your son, but there needs to be a team that takes this on.
Yeah.
And that museum, it has to get built. There's got to be a way to get the funding for that. Yeah. There has to be a rally cry for this museum, because this is not a Lynn Ochiltree vanity project here. No. Like you said, this is not my stuff.
Not about me.
This belongs to the town. There has got to be a rally cry to build this place, to fortify this history, and then be able to teach it through the schools, because it matters and it's interesting and it's fun. And the young people that are going through that school right now, not only are they going to learn about the history of the town, they are going to learn family history.
Right.
You're going to be able to point to a senior and go, you know what? Your great-great-grandfather mattered to this town, and without him, or without your grandmother that you never even knew about, this would have never happened, and it would have changed the trajectory of the community. That course has to be put together. The museum has to be built. It is not just a matter of touring a building full of stuff that says Wilton Junction, Iowa on it. That is not what it is.
Everything has a story, and the story needs to be told and remembered and shared. Nothing is ever forever unless it's shared, and Native American stories are passed down generation to generation, and the ancestors are revered, and it's the same concept that I have in this: is these people need to be remembered, and it's not about me, it's not about Brenda. It's about Wilton. It's about the people that made Wilton. Not really Wilton. Wilton's just a place. It's the people that made this town amazing, and it still does today. There's amazing people here. I could make a Mount Rushmore of Wilton today, but I'm not telling you that.
Oh yeah, it'd be impossible to do it. But I know you've got names and people floating around in your head right now that are in this community that you would love to say, but fear of not leaving someone out.
But you probably wouldn't even guess who I would say. It's the people behind the scenes. It really goes back to my funeral directing career. I was always the guy that made everything happen. You do over 250 things to get ready for a funeral, before, after, during. But I'm always behind the scenes. You'd never see me. I might roll a casket up front, but it's what goes on behind the scenes, and that's what makes a town a town. And there's a lot of people that might talk loud and say a lot of things at a meeting, but it's the people that get down dirty and do the work quietly in the back of the church, just like a funeral director.
Speaking of that, when I'm sure you have seen some people pass away in this town, mm-hmm. where it's packed, there's a lot of people there, but I bet you have sat back and go, man, if these people really knew how much that person meant to this town, mm-hmm. the line would be 10 times as long. Mm-hmm. We got to teach that. We got to share it. We got to share it. And you know what? I'm going to do my part. And I'm going to do my part by dragging you back in here on a regular basis. Okay. Bring in a couple things at a time. We'll tell some stories. Okay. We'll knock this thing out 15 minutes at a time. We'll have some fun. I need to have you as a recurring guest in here. The town needs you in here as a recurring guest. Okay. And we'll start chipping away at the idea of this course. We'll start chipping away at this museum, and we'll do it one artifact at a time. And I don't know if we'll get through all 250,000 of them, but we'll get through a little bit of a bite.
We'll see a couple.
Lynn,
thanks.
I speak for the town, and I mean it. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you guys for joining in. We're going to be going live here after school, 3:45. I've got 2 seniors coming in. I'll make a special hype video announcement here shortly, but we're going to get to know 2 more seniors up at the Wilton High School this afternoon, right after the bell dings. Lynn Ochiltree. We don't have a studio audience, so I'll pretend to be that. Thank you very much. All righty. Bye-bye.
Yeah.